Welcome anyone at this moment or later when you're watching this video. Today we have a wonderful workshop led by Dr. Malo Barahona, an associate professor in the Facultad de Educación at Universidad Católica de Chile in Chile, who will be talking about who you are matters, issues, identity issues in ELT. Her research interests focus on initial English language teacher education, during a sociocultural perspectives, and cultural historical activity theory. Malba has undertaken research on teacher identity, teacher beliefs, practice-based approaches, teachers' agency, language learning policies, and the use of emerging technologies in foreign language learning and teaching. Her work has been published in international journals such as the TESOL Journal, System Language Teaching Research Journal, among others. So we welcome you, all of you tonight and this evening, and Malba, the floor is all yours, and welcome again.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for coming here and joining us in this conversation that we're going to have about identity issues in ELT. So to start, I'm going to share my screen, and I want to do a first sort of exercise. Okay, we're going. So let me know if you can see my colorful screen. Yes, perfect. Okay, yeah, that's right. So look at all these colors, and there's some symbols there. Well, that's the idea. This is the diversity. We are, we live, and we embrace as well. So that's the invitation. And not only teachers' identity is important, but of course our students as well. And who we are is always present in every activity we do. So to start the conversation, I want to invite you all to answer on the chat, if you can. How can you answer that question? I am. Who are you? Tell me who you are. I am. Can you write your answers on the chat, please? Thank you all for answering this question that someone said. It's a hard question, especially when we are with, I don't know, in a context, this sort of a webinar, relatively formal. We're not friends. Probably most of you have seen me today. It's the first time you see me. So how can I answer that question? And you answer very differently. Again, diversity, we've got answers like student, teacher, a very complex woman. That's very interesting. It's not that you're a woman, you're a complex woman. You're a son, brother, friend, a colleague, community member, teacher, multilingual TESOL professional. That's very interesting. Multilingual, and a cis male, gay, academic, teacher, researcher. Yeah, all different categories there. An EL teacher, teacher educator, a mother, woman, dog mom. Oh, that's interesting too. Professor, learner, hiker. I could go on. Yes, of course. Yeah, I'm a person who likes to learn. I'm an American. This will depend on the context. In the context, I would introduce myself as a TESOL, teacher educator, daughter, sister, teacher, student, lifelong learner, Chinese American woman, a daughter, teacher educator. Yeah. Thank you very much again for your answers. Those answers reflect the complexity of when we want to talk about identity, when we want to refer to who you are. It's not only a single answer. On the contrary, we've got multiple answers, multiple identities too, depending on the context, depending on the role we have, depending on the life history. It's not only now, but our who you are now. Probably it has a lot to do with what happened some time ago with you, not only with you individually, but also as part of a community. So what is it that we mean by identity or identities? So we're going to start with a definition given by Norton some time ago. She has been working on identity for quite a while, and actually her work has been seminal and very thought-provoking in English language teaching, not only English language teaching, but language teaching, I would say. So she has given us some framework to analyze identity and the issues of identities. So I am quite grateful of her work, Canadian. scholar. So, what did I do? I did something. Okay. So she defines identity as how a person understands his or her relationship to the world. Yeah, and in this case, she also makes the point that this relationship is structured across time and space. So it has to do also with a bit of history. So it's about the past, but also the future too. So it's a projection. It's not only now, but also aspirations of what happens in the future. And as we said at the beginning, it's not just one identity when we talk about who we are, but we talk about different types of identities. Yep. And these different types of identities are co-constructed. It's not something that I do by myself, but of course, my personal understanding is also there. But it's very important that we understand this idea of identity as a co-construction. And it has, as we said, some individual part, that's to say kind of my own, how I see myself, but also collective, a collective nature, how others see me, yeah, and how others position me in a specific context. Yeah, and you, some of you said in this context, I should say, I'm a teacher educator. Yeah, that's probably what you expect. We all agree that you are a teacher educator. So we're talking about not only one identity, but multiple identities, yeah, that are differently related to different, we could say, categories, and sociologists are very good at this, at categorizing who we are, yeah, according to where we live, according to our ethnicity, according to gender, according to social class, etc. Yeah, but it's not only those categories that are sort of objective and given. Yeah, there's a lot to do about negotiation. Yeah, a negotiation in these crossroads. In our own history, but also the history that we're co-constructing with others. So why is it that we care about this topic? Why is it that we're studying this topic? Or why is it that it got into ELT, into TESOL, into the multilingual world? And what does it have to do with learning a foreign language? This is not something new, but something that probably our grandparents, I'm thinking about 100 years ago when other people, grandparents probably were learning different languages, could also relate to. But at that time, probably those studies, there were not many studies about that. But there have been some things about kind of when we talk about language identity, yeah, like when in this case, identity, that's to say, how people relate to, how people refer to themselves is related to the language, or not the language, but languages they are proficient, or not only proficient, they use. Yep. The idea of proficiency has other connotations as well. So in that case, it's the relationship of oneself, one sense of self, and one language, and of course different languages. Yeah, so there we have like what we could call language identity. And a blog has identified 3 kinds of relationships with languages. So on one hand, we've got this idea of language expertise, that you are proficient in the language, yeah, you're expert in the language, in different types of language, and your relationship is like that. So many teachers would consider themselves as language experts. They know about the language, they can speak it, they are proficient, but also they know a lot about that language. Another type of relationship is language affiliation, and in this case, we're talking about how an individual attitudes, the attitudes an individual has towards a language, yeah, a connection, an affective connection, yeah. Sometimes this is from my experience as a teacher, a language teacher in Chile. Students like music, a lot of music in English, so that's why they like to study the language, because they want to understand their bands, what the bands are saying. They enjoy the music, so they want to be groovy as them. So that's why that's a relationship they have with the language. And another type of relationship is language inheritance. Probably all the connections you have with the community, with the family, with a community and family setting that is particularly associated with a specific language. It's not that people have one kind of relationship. We can have that people can have these three types of relationships with one language, and of course with several languages at the same time. Yeah. Children in a country who have been migrants and their home language, that's a home language, they can become experts in that language, they become teachers of that language, and they love that language as well, because it's the language of emotions, it's the language of love, as one student of mine told me once. This is the language of love, where I can really express my feelings, whereas Spanish, it's not the language where I can express love. Spanish is the language that I can express. It's the academic language, the language I need to use for work, but for studies, but not emotionally. So as we could see, it's not, so when our students are learning a language, they relate to this language in different ways. It's not only one way. And that's kind of the key thing that teachers, we need to bear in mind all the time, that, and also of course, the purposes of the teaching and of the learning. So this goes to the idea of language learning and identity. So we can say that this idea that language learning is that a side of a struggle. Look at that. Why? It's a side of a struggle, conflict. It could be seen as a conflict, as a place that is that people have to fight, because on one hand, I mean, some people would say that actually learning a language and becoming bilingual, it's the way of life. It's like, actually Brown said that a long time ago, that every bone and fiber of your being is affected to a certain extent as you struggle to reach and learn this new language, yeah? From first language to second language, from second language to third language, etc. So in that sense, we talk about it like a side of struggle. Or as Norton until he said, like it's when students, when learners learn a language, they engage in different identities. It's not just about learning the linguistic system. It's much more than that, and that's why it's so complex as well. Yeah, considering the language is also social practice. It's not just a linguistic symbols or rules, as I said before. So every language brings many more things than the sounds or the morphemes or the phonemes, etc. Yeah, of course, I'm simplifying the things here, but I'm sure you understand what I mean. Like, kind of, we can go further. So I think this represents very well what we're just saying. So it's not just what you say or even how you say it, it's who you are and what you are doing while you say it. So that's very powerful. And this is what happens with our students and ourselves if we're teaching in our classes too. So it's how we sound, and especially depending if, for example, the language you're teaching is not the language that that student wants to learn. So there you've got a lot of resistance, you've got lots of clashes, and of course, we are pushing our students to speak and to adopt probably an identity that he doesn't want to. And that's that could be problematic. We don't want to do that, but if, oof, I don't know what I did, but that could happen as well. So in the case of English, we've got an extra thing. It's not just any language, it works as a lingua franca around the world. and it has a historical load, I would say, and also it's loaded, as we would say. So the role of English, and here I'm going to talk a bit from a foreign language perspective, and thinking specifically from Chilean perspective or from a Latin American perspective. And this is something we have to reflect about the role of any language we're teaching. And that's why we have to consider the role of a language in terms of globally and locally. What is the role in the country? Yes, accents. Yes, that's something. Yeah. What's the right accent? Yep. So the role of English. So depending on what we are teaching or depending on what we are learning, the role of English will vary. So this is related specifically, more specifically to context of Latin America or English as a foreign language. But of course, you can think about in your own context, what's the role of English? Think about globally and locally as a global phenomenon, but also locally in your country, in your own community, what's the role? Is it a powerful role? Is it the imposed role? Is it the language? In Chile, for people who don't know, English is a language that is taught compulsorily in all schools in Chile. And it's the only foreign language that is compulsory. Other languages are taught, not many though, and yeah, so it's got a very privileged position. Many people see it, and actually in the national curriculum, we have a national curriculum, and schools teachers have to teach it. And one of the main things that it's repeated throughout the discourse is that English is I mean, it's useful to learn English because you can get more money. So instead of looking at language, in this case, English language as a cultural artifact or product, it's more like a tool for economic development. So that is, that's something that teachers even repeat to their students. And of course, that has implications all the way. So important to consider, this is an example that how English, or the role of English in Chile. But this is something that teachers have to consider in their own context. What's the role of the language you're teaching? Yeah, what's the role globally and locally, or nationally and local, and in your classroom? What do students use it for? Who uses? Who is in power? Who's not in power? So that also is part of identity. Yeah, because again, if you're asking students to use this language, you are asking them to adopt an identity. So that's what comes together. So this leads to, for me at least, to consider the identity of teachers. And that's what I have been studying for a while now. And so when we consider the identity of a foreign language teacher, of course, within, I gave the example of English in Chile and the role, but in each language we have to consider that. But thinking about English, I mean, the English as a foreign language, the identity, what things or what factors are considered in this identity? On one hand, we've got this idea of language proficiency, which in the case of foreign language teachers or English taught as a foreign language, there is this view, there is the deficit view, like teachers are never good enough because of the idea of the native speaker. So teachers, foreign language teachers like myself, will never be as good as a native speaker. So there is this deficit thing. So teachers of English in Chile all the time aspire, not all the time, but there is a big pressure so that they can have not only to be good speakers, but kind of to be like native speakers. So, and there is this deficit view. If you don't get this level, you will never be a good teacher. Another issue, very important, that affects and structures and shapes the language teacher identity has to do what I said before with the role of the language you're teaching, in this case, English. What's the role of it globally and locally? Who's in power, as I mentioned, and who uses that language and for what purposes? Very important, learning trajectory. Learning trajectory, that teacher's learning trajectory. And I'm thinking about English teachers like in South America or in other parts of the world where English is taught as a foreign language. Their teachers have learned English at school, then at university, and then they have become teachers of English. So there is a long trajectory of learning. And of course, as teachers, you learn all the time. But my trajectory is different from other teachers, and I'm sure each of you trajectory is completely different. Another issue in foreign language teacher identity has to do with the beliefs about English language teaching, your own personal theories, that of course some of them are supported by research, by literature, but some others are not. Some others are your own theories, your own beliefs that you enact in your classroom, or ways that you think about how English should be taught, and that can be reasons for that could be your own learning trajectory, of course, your own training, and also personal preferences about teaching and learning too. Identity, as we said at the beginning, it's not one, it's multiple, and also it's got this thing which some personal but also collective, because we're not all we're not only the product of society, we also, human beings, teachers, have agency, and through that we also shape the community, but community shapes us too. And in terms of identity too, and this is something probably you have talked with your colleagues, how students from one school look and behave in this way, and from the other school differently. The same happens with us. When we go to a different place, we notice differences with other teachers. Yeah, we are a bit, oh, you are like this teacher, you're like that teacher. And we develop this collective identity too. But it's not just, we can also say that foreign language teacher identity, this is a construction, and that's something that I want to emphasize. It's socially constructed as a learning trajectory, which is defined by the relation between the local and the global, so the world and our own community. But it's a continuous process. It's not just one thing, we develop one identity and that's it. It's a continuous process of negotiation. And in different periods of our lives, we probably have our teacher identity would be a bit different. So change is part of it. It's not something bad, on the contrary, it's something really positive. It's part of it. In constant dialogue with others, and where the personal and the professional selves converge. Yeah, so that's why it's not just the professional. This is me in the teach, but also you bring all your personal thing into your teaching. And that results into the becoming. I look at the word becoming. It's a process, so it's a continuous. That's why it's not end. It's not that, okay, this is it, I got to this level, that's all. I think our identity develops and through our lives, through our career as teachers. Yep. Okay, so what I want to do now is, let's see if we can, after I have talked a bit about for like 26 minutes already, let's, I don't know if we can share some of these ideas. And I wrote some couple of questions on the slide, 2 questions. How do you identify yourself with English language, and how do others see you as learning or teaching English? As I saw, most of you are teachers of English, some others are learning, or some others, you said that you teach, most of you said that you teach English. So, okay, so the idea would be to discuss these questions in your group. You have 4 questions. So what image of an English teacher did you have as a school student? What motivated you to become an English teacher? Have those motivations changed throughout your career? To what extent? And are you satisfied with the teacher of English you have become? And why, of course, yeah. So let's see if we can go and discuss this into the group, if we can go to smaller groups. Okay, we're back. Coming back from break rooms is always like an experience because it's so abrupt. Well, we were engaged in conversation. I hope all of you were engaged in your conversations in your groups. I'm sure you didn't have time to go through all the questions, and more than that, it's a provocation for you to think about these things, and also to think about how your students, in the case of learning a language, in your case, you chose to teach that language. Well, who knows? When we talked about the learning trajectories, this is it. This is what we were talking about, our own learning trajectories and what we bring in the moment of teaching. All that is there. Okay, does anyone want to share something from your conversations that call your attention before we get into something else that you discuss in your groups? Your images, your motivations that changed?
Yeah, I'll just share. We just briefly talked about how, as we've evolved as language teachers, we've moved into more focus on relationship building and being authentic, being wrong, being human, tying in social justice to our teaching, and kind of moving away from, you know, native speaker pronunciation and good academic writing and perfect grammar and just all of those notions.
Yeah, that's right. Evolving. That's a good word. Evolving. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I should say we had a wide range of career stages in our group. The field has changed significantly in the last 40 years. Yeah, you mentioned social justice there. And yeah, the perspective, social justice perspective, of course, integrates identities in the classroom. So embracing diversity. And it has changed in the 40 years, quite dramatically, I would say. Yeah. Thank you very much. So now what I want to share with you is something I've been doing with students well, this is something you know, and that's why you're here actually, imagining in this webinar, how we incorporate this identity perspective to our teaching and how we become aware of cultural differences and that we all bring into our classroom. It's not, and then it becomes a side of struggle where we clash, and that's a moment, like a learning opportunity in which our students and ourselves can develop different identities. Yeah, and we help our students become members of a specific community. So, oops, no, what did I do? So I wanted to show you one activity talking about how we can integrate identity perspective to English language teaching, and also now that you mentioned social justice perspective. I work mainly with student teachers, with students who are going to become teachers of English in Chile. In Chile, they study for 5 years to become a teacher of English, and so quite a long time. But I have to say that it would be equivalent to the States, like a bachelor in English and a bachelor in education, but at the same time, let's put it that way. Yeah, and it typically takes 5 years. So something we've been doing with them is about how to incorporate identity perspectives and how to incorporate different cultural perspectives into the classroom, into the English language teaching. So one thing is like, okay, instead of course, we look at different, that's okay. We look at, in our classes, the idea is that students can learn English, but also it's like how their identity is not lost. So in this case, on the contrary, it's like who you are is really important. So if you see the question, what makes us Chileans? This activity emerged from from a group of student teachers that worked during their practicum last year when all the pandemic and it was all super high and it was remote teaching, and teachers were struggling to engage students and what to do with them. And the textbook was not enough, was not good enough. So let's look at something different. And this is part of their creation, my student teachers. So the idea was like in following a project-based sort of teaching, that they could create things like this. In this case, the example is of a podcast, and in this case, that they could tell the world about this, what makes us Chilean, about our national identity. And here we talked a lot about in classes about the stereotypes and the stereotypical features, and then comparing with specific community. This also was done not in the capital of Chile, Santiago, in other regional areas. So it was even more interesting because we discussed about the stereotypes and also how people from Santiago different from other places, and how sometimes for a foreigner we're all the same, or not for a foreigner, but even among ourselves we're the same, but we're not. And then in these cases, this is the last part of the project, and they had to create this podcast or video about a Chilean festivity or celebration, and they had to go all about that. And the student teachers created a learning path for that, in which so this was a 4-week learning path. So they had to create the task. First, it was the presentation of that, the creating, activating previous knowledge. They saw other cultural manifestations from other places, different places around the world. We're talking about here was for sort of equivalent to 7th grade, more or less, to children 11, 12 years old, more or less. This activity was done. So they had to research the topic. They had to choose also, because they could select. So it was so we had group work, and they selected different things in the class, and they drafted. Teachers monitor the feedback as well, and then they presented the video or the podcast. So yeah, that was one way. In this way, here I have something to tell. This the origin of this was that in this class, the 7th grade, they resisted learning English a lot. They said constantly, what's the purpose of us learning English? I'm not going to travel. I'm not going to do business. Why do I need to use English? What's the point of using English? So we saw different, so we tried to incorporate something that it was theirs, so that they could feel not pushed into something, but actually that they could feel the need to talk about who they are to someone else. And in this case, it was about something very, very specific. So this is just an example of how we can do it. Of course, you don't have to do, I mean, this is the thing, you can integrate different activities using their own cultural backgrounds and who they are, but also teenagers and children, they change too. So it's not one thing. And it's not only about activities, but also how we respect, embrace this diversity, the diversity of identities we have in our classroom. That's also part of it. So what about yourselves? How do you integrate your students' identities in your teaching? Does anyone want to share something, some experiences?
Well, I could share if.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes. Well, I'm a teacher educator. I work in, mostly in a master's program, and I have a lot of international students. I'm in Canada, and I have a lot of international students. So they're coming to Canada to get their master's degree in TESOL and then to go back. The way I integrate their identities is I encourage them to choose projects that involve their own the context that they're going back to. So for example, right now I have a South Korean student who is hoping to go back to Sri Lanka, where she's actually been working. And so then her projects and presentations, you know, she is encouraged to do something in that regard, and also topics that interest her. Yeah, so I try to structure my syllabus in a way that allows for a wide range of interests and cultural backgrounds.
Yeah, that's right.
Marilyn McLaughlin, am I heard?
Nice to meet you. Yes, Marilyn.
Yes. Okay, I knew where this was going, so I raced downstairs and got my book called Surveys for Conversation, which is published by, or was published by, ProLingua in Brattleboro, Vermont, and it has a series. I mean, there's 50 pages in each one. The first one, for example, let me introduce myself. The next, information, please. Others on my country. As they come in, as they dribble in late. To class, each student gets one copy of something, of one of those questionnaires. They fill them out. The first 4 people are put in a group and they share about themselves. The next 4 people that finish are put in the next group. And often there's enough time for 2 groups of conversations before everybody finally dribbles in half an hour late. I teach adults. Okay.
Yeah.
They've got kids at home. They're all coming in late. So the other, wait a minute, make my phone off. The other thing that I do is that I have my students try this with newly arrived refugees. I have them write their names on the board using their own script, right to left, top to bottom, whatever it is, Cyrillic, Russian, Cyrillic, whatever. Japanese, use your own script, write your name. And then each one has to tell the class about who they are. That's their name. And a lot of information. Who gave it to you? Your grandfather? Your mother?
Yeah.
I mean, just by writing their name in their own script, they teach about the importance of a particular script, and that's them.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
That's a couple of my ideas. I'll shut up.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Oof. Oh, yeah, that's right. So here on the chat we have other ideas. Yeah, very good ones actually. Yeah.
Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah. So. I asked them to introduce themselves to the class, as you were saying, writing their names. How do you pronounce your names? Use resources that reflect some of diversity. When we study our work on jobs content, we focus on projecting into the future. What would you like to do, I imagine? Where do you see yourself in 10 years, 5 years? Yeah, that's important. Yeah. Building what I know about them in my lessons, their roles as parents, immigrants, refugee, background learners, integrating home languages into class, discussing their workplace and life goals. I also really enjoy building personal narratives with students. Yep. Providing opportunities for them to integrate personal experience in their work, group work representations, writing, etc. And ask about their preferences, their cultures and customs. Yeah, Carter says, utilize world English varieties of English as exemplars and not only so-called native English speakers. Yeah, actually, that's very important. And that's the group I was referring to, the group of students in Chile, they kind of said, they would say, oh, English is so kind of pompous. And they were referring to some videos they have heard from the UK. But actually, when we started talking, I was starting talking about kind of music and about rap, and I said, well, those people are speaking English too, and those others too are speaking English with different accents, and they, in their heads, they were kind of different languages. So when we actually looked at different ones, and with music, they had an assignment similar to the one that you saw. With music, they couldn't believe that actually some of the things it was the same language, but the accents were so different that they hadn't noticed before. So yeah, definitely using different varieties. I teach newly arrived refugees, and it's been a goal of mine to integrate learning identities in every class. With the class I'm currently teaching, for example, we just learned about clothes, and we learned how to describe the traditional clothing. Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, building relationships with them, mutual trust, very important. As simple as it may seem, I call them by their names because being recognized by that holds great importance. It does, absolutely. Yep, your name is important, and asking them how they want to be called. Yep, so absolutely. Yeah, names. Yeah, not simple. I agree. Yeah, excellent ideas to consider. Yeah, and that's a very good thing. My name, identity. Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely. Yeah, very good ideas of how to integrate identities. And this is a challenging thing for us educators too, because we don't know the languages of our students. We know some, we could know 1, 2, but we are not going to know probably the variety. How do we deal with that? And also, how do we deal with, do you use the other languages in your English classes? Do you use their mother tongue? Do you allow them to use some work and to do some stuff in their own language? Do you share that? Mm-hmm. Do you ask them to share about their own languages? Because language is part of their identity too. So it's not, of course, they are learning English. However, their first language is also part of them. So that could be something we could also integrate about that in our classes too. Yeah. Okay, so I will finish now with, this is one quote from Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Colombian writer that probably you all know very well. And he, in his book, El Coronel no tiene quien le escriba, actually he talks a bit about identity. Well, in the book, he refers to other things, not necessarily about teaching, but I think this quote reflects about kind of identity and why it is very important for all of us. It says, los seres humanos no nacen para siempre el día que su madre los alumbren. Human beings are not born the day mothers deliver them. Life, la vida los obliga a parirse a sí mismos. Una y otra vez. Life makes us reborn once and again, once over again, all over again, many times in life, to mold and to shape, to transform, to challenge and to question themselves without answer, sometimes without any answers, and to ask what the hell, it says here, what the heck they are there and what they should do here in this land. Yeah. So, and actually for me, this is quite revealing, and also talking about culture, talking about identity. I relate to this very much. Yeah. In our lives, and all I'm thinking about as a teacher, I have reinvented myself. I have found different ways to support my teaching, to respond to my students in different ways, and also to challenge myself. I'm not doing probably this very well, am I? Yeah. And yeah, why am I here? What the heck? Yeah. What the heck? Why am I here? So I leave you with this quote. It's an interesting book. So, and well, thank you very much for coming and for being here. I don't know if you know anybody else now wants to ask some questions, or we can continue chatting about some of these issues too.
Thank you very much, Dr. Verona. So grateful for you to share your knowledge and time with us this afternoon. Are there any questions?
I'm okay.
You can also write them on the chat box if you want. There's a lot of thank yous there, Dr. Verona. Box. And as Carter said, we really appreciate that you were able to come and share your knowledge with us, and also create this community, right? Be part of this community who's interested in identity, teacher identity, learner's identity. And I'm pretty sure at TESOL will also email the link of this webinar within a couple of weeks, right? Yeah. So everybody will have the access to the recording.
I
later
believe
as well.
so, and they typically will post it to their YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. Thank you very much for being here again.
Thank you and have a good afternoon. And if you're not a member of the social responsibility interest section of TESOL, I hope you'll consider joining us.